How shall I stand before thee, but in silence? I will not rush thee with words, nor storm the heavens with the noise of my fear. I will keep silent before thee. For it is out of the silence that the presence and the power of God comes. Not out of argument, not out of multiplied prayers that beg and strain, but out of that holy hush where the inner ear opens and the still small voice is felt. God must be felt. God must be realized. God must become an experience within us, or all our talk about God is just breath upon the air. Beloved, we're a sincere people. We have tried to be good, to do right, to hold our homes, our bodies, our affairs together. We have taken vows and made plans, and kept lists and whispered prayers into the night. And still the shoulders ache as if they carried a world. Still the mind runs like a mill that never stops grinding. Still the heart asks, where is the rest? Where is the peace that passes understanding? Why, if divine activity is real, does our effort feel like pushing a boulder up a hill that never crests? Why, if the kingdom of God is within us, do we live as though God must be persuaded to come from somewhere else? I tell you, the change begins not when we sharpen our arguments, but when we consent to silence. Not by might, not by mental power, not by the repeating of formulas, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. The way out of strain is not more refined strain. The answer to the noise of thought is not a louder thought. The answer is the hush that admits, honestly and without shame, my human effort has not produced the fruits I seek. I have eaten the bread of my own labor and am still hungry. Let me now taste the bread that comes down from within the soul. We are not here to talk God into reality. We are here to touch reality and let reality speak for itself. We are here to make our contact with the infinite invisible, to discover that the presence which is closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet, does not need to be made to act. It needs to be given place. And the place we give it is silence. Listening silence. Consenting silence. A quietness that is not indolence, but receptivity. Before us stands a verse too often worn as a slogan upon the lips, and not worn as a practice in the heart. The Father within, He doeth the works. Hear it now as a doorway and not a decoration. If the Father within doeth the works, then the straining self may rest. If the Father within doeth the works, then our first act is not to perform, but to yield, not to command, but to be still and to know. In that stillness we shall begin. Let us take the verse in our hands as one would take a key, not as one takes an ornament. The Master was not paying a compliment to deity. He was disclosing the principle by which his life bore fruit. Of mine own self I can do nothing. The Father within me, He doeth the works. This is not poetry. This is practice. Not I, not the personal mind, not the straining will, not the multiplied efforts, but the indwelling presence, the infinite invisible, acting through a yielded instrument. The difference is not small. It is the difference between trying to be the light and consenting to be a window. It is the difference between carrying a burden and discovering that the government rests upon his shoulder. When this is heard not as verse to recite, but as method to live, the center of action is moved from the human to the divine. What then is this within? It is not the stirring of sentiment, not the warm flush of emotion, not the gymnastics of positive thinking. It is the kingdom consciousness, the secret place of the Most High, the inner sanctuary where God is felt, realized, known. It is the altar that needs no stone, and the temple that needs no roof, nearer than hands and feet, closer than breathing. It is the place where the still small voice is not shouted over by our petitions. It is where spirit speaks for itself and becomes conscious as our very awareness. To enter it is not to work up a mood. It is to lay down personal claim to do the works, and to be still long enough to witness what the Father is ever doing. Why then does it seem hidden? Because religion, in its sincerity and in its fear, has sent us outward to places, to persons, to performances. We have been told that on this mountain, or in that city, in this book, or with that teacher, the power resides. And the Master has said, no, neither here nor there, but in spirit and in truth. We have sought to persuade God with our many words, while the way-shower turned within and said, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me, and then allowed the works to appear. We have honored the verse on our walls, but not given it place in our hearts. We have admired the principle, and then proceeded as though human cleverness must finish what God starts. This is why the door feels shut. We have stood before it talking, when the key is silence and consent. Hear the not but that unlocks it. Not by might, but by my spirit. Not taking thought for life, but losing that anxious life and finding life. Not I live, but Christ liveth in me. The Father within names an invisible agency, self-operating, self-sustaining, that is already at work. It does not need to be summoned, it needs to be realized. It does not respond to pressure. It becomes effective as our pressure ceases. When personal will yields, when the mental hand unclenches, the inner government takes its rightful place, and the works that appear bear the signature of peace. Now bring it out of the sanctuary, to the kitchen sink, to the doctor's office, to the bank. What does it mean there that the Father within doeth the works? It means there is a way to pause and to yield in the very moment of need. There is a way to let the presence be consciously felt before word or deed is undertaken. There is a way to stop being the doer and to watch the doing flow. We will not speak of it as theory. We will learn how to stand still within a breath, within a minute, and let the invisible agency carry us into right action. For if the Father within doeth the works, then the day itself becomes our sanctuary, and every scene our altar of grace. Now let us be honest in the light. Why do we keep exhausting ourselves, even after we have heard the words of the Master? Because beneath our prayers and beneath our plans, there has been a quiet creed, unspoken but governing. It is up to me. Up to my intelligence to foresee every turn, up to my virtue to earn favor, up to my spiritual performance to secure results, up to my vigilance to keep disaster away. This hidden assumption is the altar before which we have bowed. And let us name it plainly so it may be seen and dropped. It is the worship of a personal self. We have not meant to be idolaters, but we have made an idol of me, and we have asked that idol to do the works which belong only to the Father within. Consider how subtly we have done it. We have repeated verses and yet secretly leaned on the strength of our repetition. We have attended services and yet trusted in the attendance as if it were a premium paid on a policy. We have discussed God with friends and yet gone home to the same restlessness, because talking about God does not produce the fruits of God. Prayer has been turned into pressure, straining to move an unmovable love. Meditation has been turned into mental work, tightening the brow to force silence. Faith has been turned into a tense attempt to hold a good outcome in place, as if good were fragile and must be guarded by our grip. When practice becomes a tool of anxiety, It is no longer practice in the Spirit. It is the old idol in a new robe. Here is the correction, sharp and merciful. Not self-improvement as the path to God, but yielding to God as the source of right action and right outcome. Not the strengthening of personal will, but the silencing of it. Not taking thought to accumulate answers, but keeping the mind stayed on God until answers reveal themselves. Not trying to be a better lamp, but consenting to be a clear window. The Father within doeth the works. Our task is not to produce the works, but to cease hindering the divine activity with our frantic managing. Be still and know that I am God is not advice for the serene moments. It is the practical method for the moments when everything in us wants to clutch and control. If you feel tired, take heart. That fatigue is not a failure. It is evidence that you have been trying to do in personal strength what belongs to the indwelling presence. The shoulders ache because you have carried a government that rests upon His shoulder. Lay down the tools of compulsion. Lay down the measuring rods by which you have judged your prayers. Stop your self-treatment. Stop your inner negotiations to make life safe. Safety is the nature of God realized. Supply is the nature of God realized. Harmony is the nature of God realized. And realization does not come by pressure. It comes as we consent to silence, as we let God be God in us. This is our turning, away from the subtle idol of me toward the living presence that needs no help to be itself. When we make that turn, the strain will not be adjusted. It will be absent, because the doer has changed. Not I, but the Christ. Not by might, nor by mental power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. Let us unlock the phrase now, and let it speak in its native meaning. The works are not confined to thunderclap miracles or headlines for the faithful. The works are guidance when the crossroads appear, protection that quietly redirects a step or a schedule, supply that arrives as opportunity, as right contacts, as ideas that open doors, reconciliation that melts a hard word into forgiveness, healing that restores balance to mind and body, right timing that moves us out of hurry and into harmony, courage enough to say yes when fear freezes, and courage enough to say no when flattery flatters, quiet wisdom that discerns which seed to plant and which to release to the wind. These are the works, the natural fruit of a life in which the Father within is permitted to be consciously active. There are, then, two kinds of action in our experience. There is the anxious push of personal will, with its heavy breath and its calendar of demands, its outlining of methods, and its fear of interruption. It hurries, it argues, it explains itself, it needs agreement and applause to keep going. And there is another action, an effortless movement, which does not mean inactivity, but means inner leading. An impulse arises in stillness. A word forms that bears peace. A step presents itself already lighted, and when taken, it carries its own ease. One kind of action is a load. The other is a lift. One strains for effect. The other flows as cause becoming visible. Here is the operational principle, and it is simple enough for a child and profound enough for a saint. Divine activity is already functioning. The infinite invisible is not waiting to be hired by our insistence. It is the life of our life, the mind of our mind, the law of our being, forever in right motion. Our work is not to start it, not to manage it, but to stop interfering with it. Stop outlining how, stop forcing when, stop resisting whom. We open the shutters. We do not instruct the sun. We unstop the well. We do not create the water. We become transparent. We do not manufacture the light. Do not confuse surrender with passivity. Surrender is not lying down to fate. It is standing still inside long enough to feel the right current and stepping with it. Not the negation of action, but the sanctifying of action. Not the canceling of plans, but the refusal to idolize them. Not indolence, but alignment. In the pause that yields, a right impulse is born. And that impulse contains within itself the authority and the energy to fulfill itself. Be still, and from that stillness, speak the single word that heals. Wait, and from that waiting, make the one call that reconciles. Rest, and from that rest, do the next simple thing, and watch how 10 tangled threads begin to loosen. And you have known this, have you not? A warning nudge that turned you back for the keys and saved an hour on the roadside. A sentence that arrived whole and mended a quarrel. A resource that appeared from no plan of yours. A peace that settled in the middle of bad news and would not be moved. We call it luck, timing, coincidence. I call it the Father within doeth the works. Invisible agency, already at work, momentarily unhindered because, for a breath or for a minute, we stopped trying to be the source. From this day, let that breath become our way. Not by pressure, but by presence. Not I, but the Christ. And then let the works appear. Silence, then, is not emptiness. It is the womb of realization. God must be felt. God must be realized. God must become an experience, and it is out of the silence that this realization dawns, as surely as light dawns when the earth turns her face to the sun. In that hush where we stop telling life what it must be, and cease begging God to be God, something begins to be felt, closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. It is not a sensation that flatters the nerves. It is a presence that quiets the nerves. It is not a voice that argues. It is a stillness that makes argument needless. Learn, then, the holy art of inner listening. Keep this ear open, not the physical ear, not the ear that hears traffic and conversation, but the inner ear that listens just outside the ear, the place where the still small voice is not a sentence, but a certainty. Do not listen for words. Do not strain to manufacture a message. Be content to let a quiet sense of presence steal over you. A soft I that is not the personal I. When that is felt, fear loses its authority. The outline you drew so carefully is erased without regret. And in its place, there arises an impulse that needs no defense, because it carries its own light. Here is the not but that reorders prayer and makes it operative. Not praying out at God to come from a distance and change conditions, but turning within until the soul rests in divine omnipresence. Not instructing the infinite invisible, but consenting to be instructed by it. Not rehearsing the problem to a deity outside, but relaxing the mind until the sense of God fills the space where the problem had been parading. Prayer that speaks outward remains at the rim. Prayer that yields inward touches the center. And from that center, the government flows. Why does silence work? Because silence is the yielding of mental noise. And when the noise subsides, the Christ consciousness becomes tangible. Think of a pond ruffled by wind. The sky is there all the while, but only a quiet surface reflects it cleanly. So with us. The presence is omnipresent, but it becomes consciously active as our interference ceases. In the stillness, the one mind that is the mind of you announces itself, not in syllables, but as peace, as assurance, as a steadying that includes direction and power. The very resting is an activity of God. The very hush is a law in operation. Make, therefore, a simple turn that can be practiced in the middle of any day. Pause. 1 breath. 2. Close the inner door. Stop addressing conditions. Whisper if you must, only to remind yourself, Father. Not to summon, but to remember. Then listen. Let there be a minute in which you do nothing but let God be felt. If a word rises, it will be the right word. If only peace rises, that peace will carry you into right action without strain. Thus the verse becomes usable, and thus the works appear, because the channel is open, and the Father within is free to do what He is forever doing. Now let us make this holy thing practical and repeatable, because grace becomes the law of our experience when we pay the price of attention. Not a price to purchase God, no. Not to earn favor, not to twist an arm in heaven, but to establish receptivity, to train this wandering attention to remain in the secret place where the Father within is consciously known to be doing the works. The regimen is simple, attainable, and it will carry you if you will keep it. 3 or 4 periods of meditation every day, 2 or 3 or 4 minutes each, morning, noon, late afternoon, and again before sleep. Before the feet touch the floor, sit on the edge of the bed and be still. At midday, withdraw into a quiet corner, or if none is available, close the inner door right where you are. In the late afternoon, before you launch into the evening's demands, pause again. And then at night, just before sleep, give those last moments not to news or plans, but to the presence. In those 2 or 3 or 4 minutes, do not work. Do not argue with conditions. Do not bargain with God. Do not outline how today must go or how tomorrow must arrive. Relax the forehead. Soften the breath. Let the shoulders drop as though the weight has been lifted, because it has. The government rests upon His shoulder. Whisper if your mind needs a cue. Of mine own self I can do nothing. The Father within doeth the works. And then stop. Consent. Let the stillness be the prayer. Listen, not for sentences, but for that quiet sense that God is here, closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. When even a thimbleful of peace is felt, you have made your contact with the infinite invisible. Rise and go about your day. Then, to keep that contact alive, make micro returns, 12 to 20 times a day, 10 seconds, not more. Turn within. Before you answer the phone, before you open the door, at the red light, in the elevator, washing your hands, walking from one room to another. Let there be this instant. Relax the brow, soften the breath, cease addressing the problem, and rest as though the burden has been transferred, because it has. Silently remember, the Father within doeth the works. Do not try to feel something. Simply allow the mind to stop pressing. This is not self-treatment. This is not positive thinking. This is not mental magic. This is consent. What must you avoid? Avoid rehearsing the fear under spiritual language. Avoid wrestling with appearances as if they had power. Avoid making deals with God. If you will, I will. Avoid measuring your meditation by sensations. Avoid the subtle outlining that says, "Now, Father, come this way, by 3 o'clock, through that person." Not by might, not by mental power, not by managing outcomes, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. Your part is to keep the inner door open. The Father's part is the works. If you will be faithful to these brief silences, those 2 or 3 or 4 minutes, and those 10-second returns, you will find an ease beginning to govern the day. Ideas will arrive without strain. Right timing will appear without hurry. Guidance will be recognized without debate. The practice is the price, not to buy grace, but to abide in it. Pay it gladly, quietly, regularly, and you will discover that living by grace, without taking thought, is not a dream for saints. It is the natural life of anyone who will consent to let the indwelling presence act. When a burden presents itself, pain in the body, a tangle in the home, a deficit on the ledger, a fear at midnight, do not rise up to fight it as if it were a power. Error is not a thing, it is an appearance. An appearance gains its seeming substance from our attention, from our fear, from our rehearsing of its case. Not by wrestling, not by arguing, not by piling up affirmations against it, but by realization do we meet it. We turn from the picture to the presence. We refuse the invitation to join battle on the level of appearance, and we stand still within until the reality of God becomes the only fact acknowledged. Then the appearance finds no opponent, and, finding no opponent, dissolves in the light of what is. Here is the instruction, simple and direct. Stop your self-treatment. Stop carrying the case file around in your head. Close the dossier. Lay it in the lap of God. Do not take it back again every 10 minutes to see how He is doing with it. If you must look only to renew the realization of His presence. This is not neglect. This is obedience to spiritual law. The Father within doeth the works. Our part is to stop acting as if we are a private contractor hired to make good happen. Drop the burden, quietly and deliberately, not into a void, but into realized presence. Make this inner statement, not as magic words, but as a consent of the heart. Father, you are here. You are the doer. You are the law of harmony, the life of life, the mind of mind. Therefore this burden is not mine to sustain, not mine to fix, not mine to defend. I release it into you. I relinquish ownership of it. I rest in your government. Then be still. Do not add a clause about how the answer should arrive or when. Do not tighten the brow and try to feel something. Keep the ear open, the breath soft, the mind unpressured. If even a thread of peace is felt, it is enough. That is the law in operation. As fear subsides in that realized presence, the mind clears as a pond when the wind dies. Then, without strain, right steps appear. A call to make presents itself, not as compulsion, but as ease. A word to speak forms itself, and when spoken, it lands with peace. A rest to take is recognized without guilt, and in that rest, the body reorders. An appointment is moved, and the timing proves perfect. These are not the products of a superior strategy. They are the fruits of the Father within doing the works, translated into our human scene. But be ready. The personal sense will seek to reclaim jurisdiction. It will whisper, "Do something. Hurry. Control it. Check on it." That is the old idol asking for worship. Your discipline is gentle and steady. Return again and again to the inner assurance until peace is established. 12 to 20 times a day for 10 seconds, you can drop back into, Father, you are here. You are the doer. You are the law. This is not my burden. Each return loosens another thread of the old grip, and the space it opens is filled, not by emptiness, but by grace. We are not denying appearances. We are denying them status as power. We are not indifferent to needs. We are releasing them from our management into the only mind that knows how to meet them. In that surrender, not passivity but alignment, the works appear without strain, and we find ourselves carried. Then we can say, not as a theory but as a testimony, I laid it in the lap of God, and the government rested where it belongs. And when at last peace holds, the problem that demanded so much yesterday will be seen for what it was, a mist before the morning, gone when the sun is up. Not I, but the Christ. Not by might, nor by mental power, but by my Spirit. And so the burden is lifted, because it was never ours. When the burden has been laid down, and the hush has been honored, how shall we recognize when the Father within acts? The sign is simple and unmistakable to the soul that has learned to listen. There is peace. Not sentiment, not excitement, not the intoxication of a big idea, but a quiet certainty, a sense of being carried rather than pushing. The impulse that arises does not argue. It does not sell itself. It does not come with a stopwatch in its hand. It rests while it leads. It is as if the breath deepens of itself, as if a light touch moves you one step and then another, without the old mental drafting and redrafting of plans. This is the signature of the invisible agency: simplicity, hush, sufficiency. Discernment is needed, because not every stirring in us is the Spirit. The Father within never drives by fear, never hurries by panic, never lures by self-glorification. The still small voice will not flatter the personal sense, nor will it shame it. It simply renders it unnecessary. If you find yourself tightening to force a result, rehearsing speeches to win approval, or rushing because it must be now or never, pause. That is the old idol asking for your worship. Return to the inner stillness and wait until the aroma of peace is again unmistakable. The real leading can afford to wait a moment while you test it in silence. It carries its own authority, and authority is patient. This is not passivity. Action is holy when it is born of rest. Often you will find that only the next step is given, no more. Take it without strain. Do not outline the fifth step. Do not borrow anxiety from tomorrow. There is daily bread, daily light, daily grace. I can of mine own self do nothing is not weakness. It is the opening through which the works appear. One simple obedience at a time. In this way, responsibility is not avoided, it is transfigured. For it is no longer the burden of a separated self, but the office of one who abides in oneness. What are the fruits? A reconciliatory word appears unforced, and when spoken, it softens what hours of argument could not touch. Supply comes by an unexpected channel, a forgotten invoice paid, a phone call that was not on your list, an idea noticed on a quiet walk that becomes the open door. Strength returns to the body not through anxious inspection, but as rest is permitted and the inner ease reorders function. A schedule rearranges itself without drama, and the timing proves exact. There is a thread of rightness through it all that cannot be traced to your cleverness. It bears the fragrance of, not I, but the Christ. Avoid the trap of spectacle. The works are not staged displays for the satisfaction of the senses. They are the natural evidences of conscious union. You need not advertise them to yourself or to others. Simply measure by peace. If the action is right, it will harmonize before, during, and after. If the timing is right, it will unfold without bruising. Keep the inner contact, test every impulse in silence, and let the law of the Spirit prove itself by its own fruits. Right action without strain and outcomes that exceed personal planning, because the Father within doeth the works. All that we have said of guidance and timing comes to fullness only when you allow a new name to rest upon you. Stop rehearsing your biography as if it were your identity, your history of wins and wounds, your profession, your family legend, your diagnosis, your virtues and your vices. Those may be pages in the book, but they are not the life. The life is the presence. The animating reality is the Father within. To keep saying, "I am a struggling person trying to reach God," is to keep the ladder up against the wrong wall. The turn is this: I live, yet not I. Christ liveth in me. The Father within doeth the works. Not poetry, not embroidery for a wall, but identity, here and now. Let me correct a subtle fear, because I have watched it close the door on many a soul. This is not self-deification. This is not the little me crowning itself and claiming God's throne. It is the very opposite. It is the surrender of the private doer so that God may be God in you. God as your life, God as your mind, God as your breath and law. Humility is not a performance. Humility is recognition. I of mine own self can do nothing. Therefore I cease trying to be cause, and I consent to be transparency. Not the son of the carpenter, but the Christ. Not the anxious personality, but the indwelt life. Not the seeker, but the found. And what happens when this is accepted, even a little? The endless project of proving yourself begins to retire. The need to be right grows quiet. The need to be true stands up. You become gentler without becoming vague. You become more accurate without becoming hard. Reactions slow and responses quicken. The tongue waits for peace and then speaks with weight. Decisions no longer arrive by wrestling, but by recognition. You will notice practical changes. The body no longer receives the orders of fear each hour. The face softens. The calendar gains margin. The mind stops pacing and begins to perceive. You do what you do, and the works appear, without the old commentary accusing or applauding. But hear this: identity must be stabilized by contact. If you neglect the inner return, the old biography will claim you by habit, and with it will come the familiar strain. Therefore, continue the practice that brought you to the door. 3 or 4 periods each day, 2 or 3 or 4 minutes, simply to rest in the realized fact: Father, you are the life of me. Then keep the thread with those 10-second returns, 12 to 20 times a day, not to get something, but to stop being someone. Each pause loosens the story of me and lets the I that is God be felt. In this way, striving ends, because the striver is no longer enthroned. Identity has passed from the laboring self to the indwelt life. Not I, but the Christ. And when that is so, the works follow naturally, like light through a clean window. One with God is a majority. Live by grace without taking thought, and let the Father within do what He is forever doing, being Himself as you. Closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. Here He is. Here you are. One life, one mind, one peace. And now the solemn word that must be spoken if this is to live in you beyond tonight. Do not make of this a beautiful idea to admire and then misplace among your souvenirs. Treat it as the pearl of great price. Guard it. Protect it with constancy and with discretion. Do not parade your practice. Do not explain it to those who have no hunger for it. Keep it in the secret place where the Master told you to pray. For it is there, in the hiddenness of your own heart, that the Father within is consciously felt and the works are brought forth. The kingdom of God is within you. Make your contact with the infinite invisible, and then keep that contact by valuing it above the noise and the novelty of the day. Cut down the noise that scatters your attention. Not because newspapers or radios or screens are evil, but because a mind kept outward cannot hear the still small voice. Simplify your inputs until inner listening becomes normal. Reduce the diet of headlines and hurry. Let the entertainment be pared back until the appetite for silence is fed. You will not miss anything necessary. You will gain what is indispensable. Lighten your calendar, if only by minutes, so that morning and noon and evening can bear those 2 or 3 or 4 minutes of quiet in which you neither ask nor argue, but rest and listen. Replace much talking with a little hearing. Replace much reading about God with the felt awareness of God. Not noise, but knowing. Not commotion, but communion. Set your expectations aright. The mind will return to its old habits. The personal sense will seek to seize the reins. Fears will suggest that you are behind, that you must hurry, that you must manage. Do not condemn yourself for this. Each return to silence is not evidence of failure. It is the very practice. Come back again, softly, without self-reproach, without a stopwatch in your hand. 12 to 20 times a day, 10 seconds at a time. Drop back into, Father, you are here. You are the doer. Let that be enough. If you forget, remember again. If you wander, return. If you worry, lay it once more in the lap of God and rest. Perseverance in gentleness will do what pressure never did. And so the circle closes where we began. If the Father within doeth the works, then we can cease exhausting ourselves with the pretense of being the source and begin living from presence. Not by might, neither physical force nor mental strain, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. One with God is a majority. Identity secured in not I, but the Christ. Practice anchored in brief, faithful silences, and life unfolding under a government that is gentle, exact, and sufficient. This is grace made practical, here, not later. Therefore let us commit together, quietly and without trumpet, to the small, steady obediences, 3 or 4 periods a day, 2 or 3 or 4 minutes of unpressured listening. And through the day, those living pauses that say only, Father. Guard the inner contact. Keep this ear open. Live by grace without taking thought, and watch the works appear. Peace where strain stood. Guidance where confusion argued. Supply where lack complained. And the gentle government of God where anxiety once sat on the throne. Bless you. Go in silence. Walk in the confidence of grace. The Father within doeth the works.